June 19th, 1953. Sing Sing Prison, New York. It is just after 8 o'clock in the evening when the guards open the cell door. First comes Julius Rosenberg. Then, a few minutes later, his wife, Ethel. They are not generals. They are not high-ranking officials. They are a former engineer from the Lower East Side and a former secretary who once dreamed of being a singer. Tonight, the United States government is going to execute them both. The official reason is simple: conspiracy to commit espionage, passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War. The real story is not simple at all.
To understand the Rosenberg trial, you have to understand when it happened. By 1949, the United States no longer had a monopoly on the atomic bomb. The Soviet Union tested its first nuclear device that year. Less than a year later, Mao's forces took control of China. American troops would soon be fighting in Korea. At home, there was a new enemy. Not an army, but an idea. Communism. Congress held hearings. Lists of suspected subversives circulated. Careers were destroyed by a single accusation. Senators and congressmen built their reputations by promising to hunt down traitors inside the government, inside Hollywood, inside universities. Fear was not a background noise. It was the atmosphere.
Parents kept emergency radio sets in their living rooms. School children practiced duck and cover drills under their desks, as if a thin sheet of wood and metal could shield them from a nuclear blast. The point was not really safety. It was the feeling that something, anything, was being done. In that atmosphere, the line between a political opponent and a mortal threat blurred. A communist was not just someone with different ideas. In the public imagination, a communist could be the person who handed your enemies the power to erase your city in a single flash. This is the climate in which federal agents arrested Julius Rosenberg in 1950, and then, weeks later, his wife, Ethel.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg did not look like the villains of a spy thriller. They were children of Jewish immigrants from New York's Lower East Side, born into crowded tenements, rigid parents, and very little money. Both were intelligent, ambitious, and politically active from a young age. In the tenements where they grew up, privacy was rare, and money even rarer. Families argued through thin walls. Laundry hung permanently in narrow air shafts. Children learned early that the world was divided into those who owned and those who served. For young people like Julius and Ethel, radical politics did not start as treason. It started as an explanation for why their parents worked so hard for so little. Julius studied electrical engineering. In the 1940s, he worked as a civilian engineer for the US Army Signal Corps. That position gave him access to military technology and to other engineers who worked even closer to sensitive projects. Ethel had once tried to become an actress and a singer. By the time of their arrests, she was a full-time mother. They had 2 young sons. Both had been members of the American Communist Party. In the 1930s, that did not automatically mark someone as a traitor. By the early 1950s, it almost did. The question at the heart of the case was not just whether they were communists. It was whether they were spies.
The case against Julius Rosenberg began with another man, Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. In 1950, British intelligence concluded that Fuchs had been passing secrets to the Soviets. Under interrogation, he admitted it. His confession led investigators to a New York-based courier named Harry Gold. Gold's confession led them to yet another man, David Greenglass, a machinist who had worked at the Los Alamos laboratory during the war. Greenglass was Ethel's younger brother. Each man in that chain had already crossed a line. Each had already lied to his own government, and each now depended on that same government for mercy. Their stories were told first in interrogation rooms, not open courtrooms, with the promise, or the threat, that what they said could mean the difference between a long sentence and the rest of their lives. Facing serious charges of his own, David Greenglass told the FBI that Julius Rosenberg had recruited him into a small espionage ring, that Julius had asked him to pass along information about the design of the atomic bomb, that he, David, had drawn sketches and written notes, and that these materials had eventually gone to the Soviets. From this moment on, Julius Rosenberg was not just a communist. He was, in the eyes of the government, a link in a chain that reached from a New York apartment directly to Moscow. The problem was that almost all of this chain existed only in testimony, in what cooperating witnesses said after they had already been caught. There were almost no documents, no intercepted messages, no photographs of secret meetings in dark corners. The government's case would hang on the words of other admitted spies, trying to save themselves.
Julius was arrested in July 1950. For weeks, federal agents questioned him intensely. He denied everything. Ethel was arrested in September. The evidence against her was noticeably thinner. She had never worked on military projects. She had never had direct access to classified information. The key accusation against her came from her own brother. David Greenglass now said that Ethel had been present when Julius asked him for information, and that she had typed up his handwritten notes on the atomic bomb. Those two things, being present and allegedly typing, became the core of the government's case against her. Why arrest her at all? Many historians, and later even some officials, would conclude that Ethel was charged and threatened with death less because of what she had done personally, and more as leverage. A way to pressure Julius to talk and to name other names. If that was the strategy, it did not work. Julius spoke only to insist on his innocence. The prosecutors decided to move forward anyway.
The trial opened in March 1951 in federal court in New York. The presiding judge was Irving Kaufman. The lead prosecutor was Irving Saypol, widely known in the press as the country's #1 communist hunter. From the beginning, the case carried the weight of the Cold War on its back. The courtroom itself became a kind of stage. Reporters filled every seat in the press row. Sketch artists captured every tilt of the defendants' heads. Outside, newsreel cameras waited to film the lawyers as they stepped down the front steps each day, microphones catching only the shouted headlines of the moment. Jurors were instructed to ignore the noise, but they still went home each night to neighbors, radios, and newspapers that repeated the same message. This was not just another trial, this was a test of whether America would be soft on traitors. The prosecution's story was simple and dramatic. Julius Rosenberg had built a spy ring that helped the Soviets obtain the atomic bomb years earlier than they otherwise would have. Ethel had helped him and had been a full conspirator.
They presented witnesses who had already admitted their own roles in espionage and had made deals with the government. Klaus Fuchs had implicated Harry Gold. Harry Gold had implicated David Greenglass. David Greenglass now implicated Julius and Ethel. Greenglass told the jury that he had handed Julius detailed information on the bomb, that he had drawn sketches, and that Ethel had typed them up to make them more legible. He was asked why he had not mentioned his sister's typing in his earliest statements. Memory, he said, had filled in. The defense was outmatched from the start. The Rosenbergs' lawyers had limited experience with national security cases. They had no access to secret government files. They could not see the intercepted Soviet communications that decades later would show that Julius had indeed been involved with Soviet intelligence, but not necessarily in the way the prosecution claimed. In the courtroom, the jury saw only one version of the story. The United States was at war in Korea. The Soviet Union now had nuclear weapons. The newspapers outside the courthouse did not treat this as a complicated legal matter. They treated it as a test of national strength.
After less than a month of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned with a clear answer: guilty. Both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage. The sentencing hearing that followed has become one of the most debated moments in American legal history. Judge Kaufman used the opportunity to deliver a speech from the bench. He said that the Rosenbergs' crime was not just passing secrets. He said they had helped the Soviet Union achieve the atomic bomb, and that this, in turn, had emboldened communist aggression in Korea. In his words, the Rosenbergs had caused the deaths of tens of thousands and had put millions of Americans at risk. He then sentenced both of them to death. In the defense chairs, Julius stared straight ahead. Ethel, according to some observers, seemed almost stunned, not by the word guilty, but by the leap from conspiracy to the ultimate penalty. No one in that courtroom could point to a single document she had stolen, a single piece of classified paper found in her home. Yet she now carried the same sentence as her husband. Her death sentence sent a very clear message anyway. This was no longer just about two individuals. It was about the entire climate of fear.
For the next 2 years, lawyers filed appeal after appeal. None succeeded. Around the world, protests grew. Writers, scientists, clergy, and ordinary citizens argued that even if Julius had been involved in espionage, executing both of them, especially Ethel, was an extreme and irreversible punishment. In Paris, Rome, London, and Mexico City, marchers carried signs with their names. Famous authors signed petitions. Some protesters were communists, others were not. Many simply believed that in a supposedly careful legal system, doubt should not end in an electric chair. The White House received thousands of letters, some begging for mercy, others demanding that the government stand firm. The US government did not bend. On June 19th, 1953, Julius and then Ethel Rosenberg were executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Witnesses said Julius died quickly. Ethel did not. It took multiple jolts before doctors declared her dead. Back in New York, 2 children were left without parents. In the years that followed, the case did not fade. It hardened into symbol. For some, the Rosenbergs were traitors who got what they deserved. For others, they were martyrs of a political panic that had turned the justice system into a weapon.
Decades after the executions, new information emerged. Declassified Soviet records and decrypted American intercepts from the VENONA project strongly suggest that Julius Rosenberg had, in fact,
cooperated with Soviet intelligence during the war, mainly on military-industrial secrets, not necessarily on the detailed design of the atomic bomb. The VENONA project was a secret American effort to read portions of Soviet diplomatic and intelligence traffic during and after the Second World War. The decrypts were partial, fragmentary, and never meant for courtroom use, but taken together, they showed that an agent network linked to Julius had existed, and that Moscow considered him useful. They did not, however, support the idea that Ethel had been a key technical source. In many ways, she appears more in the shadows of family loyalty than at the center of any spy ring. Her brother, David Greenglass, would later admit that he had lied on the stand about seeing her type the notes. He said he had done it to protect his own wife from being implicated. That single change, who supposedly sat at a typewriter in a small New York apartment, reshapes how the case looks. It does not turn Julius into a victim. It does turn the spotlight back on why Ethel was charged, condemned, and executed. Many historians now argue that she was used as leverage, as an example, as a message to any American who might think about helping the Soviets. A life turned into a warning. The Rosenberg trial is often remembered as a spy story. It was that. It was also a story about what fear can do to a legal system. The verdict in 1951 was clear. The state had decided what story it needed to tell. Whether that story was justice or something closer to a warning written in electricity is a question history still has not agreed on.